All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of AWM Insights. Brandon and Justin here. We're going to continue this series really talking about the multi-generational wealth formula. For clients listening, you've certainly heard us talk around this. You've heard us talk about multi-generational quite a bit. And from last week's episode, there is a formula that at a very high level, I think, explains kind of the broad strokes for everybody. So that's what we're going to break down over the next couple of weeks, because at the end of the day, we all know this, we use this phrase a lot, is that money is just a tool. It's a tool to help us to accomplish our priorities. And a lot of times our priorities have this circular effect where if we take care of our human capital and filter it all the way down the formula, we end up with this income that we get to reinvest. We get to reinvest into investments. We get to reinvest back into our human capital, et cetera. But we're going to start at the very top here and just talk about the three different components as we see it to human capital. Some you're going to be more familiar with than others, but we're all in a process of developing all three constantly. And so, those three are really physical, intellectual, social. And because, we rely on our intellectual capital the most, I'd love to hear from you, Justin, just to talk a little bit about, especially in our client shoes, how do they think about intellectual capital? What is intellectual capital? And maybe touch on that a bit.
The first thing I would say to this answer, and really the formula broadly speaking, is any given individual is probably at a different point or maximizing or optimizing, however you want to think about it, different aspects of this formula at any given time. That's no different when it comes to human capital. So physical capital, a lot of our professional athlete clients are really optimizing that when they're actively playing. A lot of our founders, entrepreneur clients are really maximizing or optimizing the intellectual capital, taking ideas, taking their education or their life experience, whatever it may be, right? All these things that develop who you are as an individual, really the mental strength, let's say, that you may have, and putting that into the ground, so to speak, and turning that into something of value. Generally speaking, if you're starting a company, right, there's a financial end game here. But really, it is harnessing all of that life experience, both formal education, informal education. It's not necessarily making a judgment on any type of education, right? You're just taking all of this experience that feeds into who you are from an intellectual standpoint and turning it into a bigger, better idea than it is, I guess, on its own, right? The whole sum of the parts is more than each individual part by itself. And then that really bleeds into all these other pieces, right? You can use your intellectual capital to influence your social capital. You can use your intellectual capital to influence your physical capital, right? Really understanding the body. You can use your intellectual capital to understand business better and all that. But it's a really, really critical component. It almost bleeds through all of these different things, and social capital probably more so than any.
Yeah, and I think that's an interesting thing to touch on is the social capital aspect. So, I think in the traditional business sense, people think about this as, building your social network. How do you develop relationships that may be able to benefit you from an earnings standpoint, right? Whether you're a founder and you're going to raise money for your company or you're going to sell a product, et cetera. Or if you're an athlete and, you're going to use this social capital to find, investment opportunities, for instance, that may end up benefiting you. But there's also this tool aspect, right? It doesn't always have to be, as you alluded to, a pure money decision. It could be, I'm going to use my social capital to accomplish my priority of giving back. So right. We have, a client, I was on a call this morning that is doing a charity event in Milwaukee, and they're going to use their social capital, his platform, to be able to draw these people in to benefit the Ronald McDonald Foundation. And what a great, use of social capital to be able to achieve a priority for this family. So I think, thinking about the social capital, you can certainly start to optimize those things. And then the physical capital, right? Most of our clients that are listening are athletes. And this is something we talk a lot about. I think this gets lost in the multi-generational wealth formula for non-traditional or people that don't work in this space, because, when we hear a training expense, or we hear paying for a nutritionist, or we hear, hiring a private chef, what we hear is reinvestment, a reinvestment in your physical capital, and probably, the greatest opportunity for outsized returns. Whereas most unfortunately, people hear those as expenses. And that's where this beauty of this formula comes in, is if you take care of the entire wealth formula, you get this opportunity to reinvest. And that's something that we really advocate for. Clients listening know that. We advocate for reinvestment in your physical capital. We advocate for reinvestment in your intellectual capital. If you're learning new things, if you have to pay for education, if you have to take a trip, you're an athlete, you want to learn about venture, and you have to book the flight to get to Silicon Valley, that's a great expense to start to learn more and more about it.
And one thing I'd say across all of these, you have to right size them at the right stage of your life. Don't just go, as a rookie, go buy a personal chef. Chances are you can't afford it, right? Necessarily. So you have to do what you can within your means, within a well-structured plan, right? Going back to that aspect, right? You don't want to just put all your money into one aspect. You want to diversify it. You want to really be thoughtful in reinvesting in this whole virtuous cycle that we've hit on here. You want to be thoughtful and right size everything accordingly.
Yeah, and I think that's the beautiful thing, is that throughout the course of your life, right, you're also going to have overweightings to these different types of capital. Yeah. Early on, when you're able-bodied and you can play your talent and earn the physical capital, there's probably no greater return as a professional athlete. But there will come a day, we all know this, like everybody, at least our clients, are smart enough to not say like, oh, I'm going to put my head in the sand and wait. No, there's got to be some dripping of intellectual and social capital throughout your career, so that when you get to that end, even if you have a Hall of Fame career, you earn hundreds of millions of dollars, you still have life after the sport. And so working on that intellectual and social capital will become just so important as the tool to create a wealthy, flourishing family that we so often talk about. So hopefully this was helpful, just kind of a high level at the very top. What is the human capital piece of this? How do we think about capital? And I hopefully gets the juices flowing a little bit. Physical capital for you athletes, front of mind, but how could you maybe increase that intellectual or social side a little bit? You don't need to go all in, but you definitely need to start thinking a little bit about it. And then for our founders, we all know this, physical capital, pretty darn important.
Often so maybe overlooked. Yeah,
maybe this is a little shake up, and maybe I'm just speaking to myself, but that you need to worry about that a little bit as well. So hopefully this is helpful. Very start of this series. We'd love to hear questions from you. Shoot us a text, 714-504-7689. Goes right to my phone. But until next time, own your wealth, make an impact, and always be a pro.
The information in this podcast is educational and general in nature and does not take into consideration the listener's personal circumstances. Therefore, it is not intended to be a substitute for specific, individualized financial, legal, or tax advice. To determine which strategies or investments may be suitable for you, consult the appropriate qualified professional prior to making a final decision.